Okay, and we're off. Good morning, everybody. You're very, very welcome to our November session of Dirty Salad Club. I hope everybody is feeling well, keeping safe, and if, dare I say, is starting to feel a little bit festive. I feel we're sneaking it in there this morning. I've got my reindeers up here behind me on my picture, and Becca, I feel your jumper has a nice little festive feel to it. So we're easing into the festive vibes this morning. Thanks so much to everybody for joining us. For anybody who it's your first time here, the name Dirty Salad Club always gets a little bit of curiosity and interest around it. And it's called so because dirty, look, this is our place to be vulnerable. The dirty things, whether it's about our home, a stain on our clothes, anything like that, they're usually the things that we don't really want other people to see, or we might not share with other people. So this is our space to do that, to share, to be vulnerable. Salad because it's good for us, it's healthy, it's great for us to learn, and then club because we're all in this together and we're all learning together. We have a different host every month for Dirty Salad Club, and soon we'll be looking into hosts for 2022. So if any of you here today would like to host, if you know anybody that you think might like to host, please feel free to get in touch. You can pop us a message on the LinkedIn group or on our email at info@kinchlions.ie. We'd love to hear from you. So welcome anybody who might like to host for 2022. Today, we're very, very lucky to have with us the very lovely and very wonderful Becca Brighty of Brighty People, which is such a super name, Becca. I think we could stop there and it would be a good introduction as it is. So Becca Brighty of Brighty People is a psychologist and a coach. And Becca really focuses on working with businesses and organizations to help them recruit and to develop awesome people, and people who are really going to be a good cultural fit and really fit with the values of the organization as well. So going above and beyond the competencies and skills that we generally tend to look at there. So Becca, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, and we leave everybody in your capable hands for the morning.
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, so yeah, my name, I got married like 4 years ago, and I'm like, yeah, honestly, I'm going to change my name soon, I promise. But no, I have to keep it. So yeah, good morning, everybody. I am here today to talk to you about the neuroscience of organisational change, and how having a bit of an understanding about the brain can help minimise the threat response. And by the end of this, you will really understand really well what the threat response is, and you'll be sick of hearing the word threat response. But we want to, in times of change, that's when that really can become a problem. And we want to try and, as much as we can, to minimise that. So the key takeaway from this session is, what can I do to minimise the threat response and maximise the reward response within my colleagues' brains? But just before we start, so what I want you to do is I want you to write down, this is just for you, write down one thing that you've done in the past 12 months that you're really proud of. So if you just take a minute to do that. Okay, so thanks for that. And then if you could just tell me, either if you can speak, I know sometimes people feel a bit uncomfortable, but if you are comfortable to speak, or if you just pop in the chat, what if you wanted to lose weight, what would you do? What kind of things would you stop doing? What would you start doing?
Exercise.
Exercise, yeah. Great. Anything else? Eating less, yeah, definitely. Put away the left. Yes, Tanya, you need to pour soap over them. That's what I hear you have to do with things like that. More exercise, less Guinness. Exercise more, eat less. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so for me, it would be to drink less wine, walk more. And so all these, the reason why I ask that question is because all your answers are telling me is that you would use an understanding of science to achieve a goal. And so that's what this is about. This is about working with your biology, which is what you're doing in that case. So if you want to lose weight, you're like, okay, so I understand kind of the basic principles of, if I want to lose weight, I need to burn more energy than I intake. And so this is how I would do it. If you had no understanding of those principles, losing weight would be really difficult. Well, it's really difficult, but it would be even more difficult and almost impossible. And so, but what we in general are doing all the time is trying to make people be effective and trying to reach a people goal without having that understanding of how people work, of the basic information. And that's all this is about. So it's just the very basic information about how the brain works and how to kind of calm people down during times of stress. I'm getting a bit stressed now because I can't get rid of this chat in the middle of the screen. Right, there we go. So get the threat response. Okay, so what we're going to cover today is my experience in ethos, so you kind of know a bit about me and why I'm so passionate about this kind of stuff, why you should care about neuroscience, change in employee engagement, bit of information about the brain, as I say, quite basic stuff, what happens to the brain during change and the kinds of things we can do about it. And at the end, hopefully we'll have enough time for questions. This is usually a workshop, so I am sharing a lot of information with you. I understand a lot of you are practitioners, and I probably might be at some point thinking, oh, it's just too much information, not enough activities. It is usually a workshop, but we don't have enough time today to do the activities that we would usually do. But I have been assured that it is all interesting information, so we should be able to keep going for the 45 minutes. Okay, so in terms of me, so I'm an organisational psychologist and an accredited business coach, an ex-miserable employee, and an ex-sufferer of imposter syndrome. So the miserable employee part, this is part of the thing that like fuels me. It's like now, knowing what I know, I see that if people had just known some of the stuff that I've now learned, that those experiences for those many years wouldn't have been anywhere near as bad for me. And a lot of organisations wasted a lot of money on hiring me. There didn't need to be that situation for either party. And I don't think that this kind of stuff, so you hear about like back in the day, like Steve Jobs wouldn't wear a different shirt. He would wear the same shirt every day. And that was because he wanted to save his decision making for important decisions. And Mark Zuckerberg and all these people are doing this stuff where they're working with their biology, but we kind of just don't get to, us mere mortals often don't get to know about this stuff. And so I just think everybody should be able to have this kind of information to make themselves as effective as they can be. I mentioned ex-sufferer of imposter syndrome. Coaching is what cured that for me. But in terms of for the purposes of this presentation, why I've included it, is this becomes worse during times of change. So if you have people in your organisation or people who you work with who suffer from imposter syndrome, that will get worse for them during times of change. Just to make this whole situation worse, imposter syndrome is associated with high performers. So your high performers are the ones who during times of change are more likely to suffer more than others. In terms of my ethos around my work, I do really genuinely believe that everyone can be happy and brilliant at work. It's just about finding or creating the right conditions for each individual to thrive. And by understanding how people's brains and biology work, we can make that a lot easier. And then I've mentioned there that I have a startup called We Love Work, which was a values-based recruitment app, and I've also been an NHS organisational psychologist. I just mentioned that because of the fact that like they're two quite polar opposite situations, and this kind of stuff is just as relevant as a startup as it is in an 8 million employee organisation. Okay, so then in terms of why should you care about neuroscience? Well, first of all, it's simple. So I really like doing this talk because I'm like, oh, I'm going to talk about neuroscience, and then everyone thinks, oh, you must be smart. But the level I'm talking about it at is it's not that neurosurgeon type level, but it's just a simple theory of, if you do this, you will likely to make people go into the threat response, and if you do this, you're likely to make people go into a reward response. What I'm going to do going to make someone go into threat response or reward response? So it's quite a simple thing. It's not a fad. So I don't know about you guys, but I'll go to conferences where this is the next big thing, and this is what we all need to learn about, and this, we need to start doing this way of management or this method, and then the next year when you go, it's not being mentioned, and everyone's like, oh yeah, that was an interesting talk actually, but I don't remember the details. Neuroscience isn't like that. Our brains haven't really changed that much in the past 40,000 years. So I think it's, in terms of investment of time and energy, it's a good return on investment, and we can be quite safe. And then to get the best out of something, you need to understand it. So I have a Mac computer, and my mum's husband, who is a CTO, he has a Mac computer. If you saw the way we both do things on our computers, you wouldn't believe it was the same thing that we were using. When you see some of this presentation, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But we're working with the same machinery, but yet what we can do is completely different, because he has a really good understanding of his computer and I don't have any major idea about mine. And so he can get so much more out of the same thing just by having that knowledge. And so that's what I want to share today. It's just that knowledge to help us all get the best out of people. Okay, so this is something I come across all the time. I don't like how things are. I can't see what it says. But basically, I don't like how things are, but I can't change. But we can change, and we are changing all the time. And so it's just a matter of working with your biology. So your brain cells are being renewed all the time, your stomach lining's being renewed all the time. And it's just something that is constantly happening to us. It's just a matter of working with our biology. Okay, so the brain. So this is just some basic information on the brain. The main goal of the brain is survival, and the way it does this is to minimize threats to our survival and maximize rewards that will help us to survive. And so our brains aren't living in the world we're living in. So threats are things like a tiger or a snake or some sort of terrible weather incident. And rewards are things like water, shelter, and food. And both matter, obviously, but we can live without water for a week. We can live without food for a month, maybe more after lockdown, actually. And we can live without shelter, depending on the climate you live in, potentially indefinitely. So although it's important, obviously, to have water, shelter, food, it's much more important to avoid those threats. So if you're going to get caught by a tiger, that's an imminent threat to your life. So you need to be able to avoid that. And so because of that, the threat response is a much stronger response. And so when we're in the threat state, our energy is sent to parts of the brain important for survival. So our digestion slows down, our immune system suppressed, cortisol is released, and the brain gets ready for action, and that stops sleep. So I don't know if probably everyone's experienced this. When you're really stressed about something and you really need sleep, that's the time when you just can't sleep. And that's because your brain, if you're really in a threatening situation, you don't want to be asleep. Whereas in a reward state, the brain releases chemicals such as dopamine that help with focus and performance and motivation. And so if you think of this in terms of a workplace example, if you have ever received an email criticising your performance, you'll think about it loads, you'll probably read it loads of times, you'll be talking to one person and it'll be playing on your mind. Whereas if you've ever had an email saying you did a really great job, you probably think, oh, that's nice, You might forward it to your mom, but other than that, you probably don't think about it that much. And that is because of, for us now, that is a threat to us. That's the modern day version of a tiger, is having some sort of threat to our survival within the workplace. Some more information about the brain that's important to know is that the brain is a prediction machine. So subconsciously, our brain's always trying to guess what's going to happen to us. And this stems from our brain's desire to protect us. And so in terms of in the workplace, there was a study done after the crash in 2008, where they did an employee engagement survey on people, and some of the people within the organisation knew they were going to lose their jobs. Some people were staying in the bank, but they didn't know whether or not they would end up staying or going. And they found that the people who were the most engaged were the people who knew that they were leaving. And so you would think that in terms of a kind of a stressful situation, or a situation that would be perceived as threatening, losing your job would be it. But because of that ability to predict and know what was going to happen, those people were still engaged with their jobs. So we just want to read this little passage here. Okay. So we've all been wasting all that time learning how to spell. Apparently you can just get yourself understood just as well without it. And so this is just to underline the fact that our brains love shortcuts. So our brains take shortcuts and jump to the easiest conclusion based on past experiences, worries, things that we've seen, things we've read about. And this is really beneficial because it saves us time and energy. So 30% of our body's energy is used up by our brains. And it's good because it saves us precious time and energy that we might need to make our escape. So if there's a rustling in the bushes and you're on the savannah, you don't want to be thinking, is that a snake? Could be a mouse. Maybe it's just the wind. You just want to get out of there. So that's good. But then it's also a hindrance because we make decisions unthinkingly. And sometimes when we just make a decision based off past experiences, they're not the best decisions. Another thing to note is that the brain sees the workplace as a social system. So although our workplace of work is somewhere we go to make money and to contribute, our brains see the workplace first and foremost as a social system, a place in which to build relationships, to find allies and to form one's tribe. And then finally, this is kind of just the crux of it all really. Our brain is not designed for the 21st century workplace. And so what often I'll work with people and they'll be like, I just need them to change. I just need them to be engaged. I just need them to do this. And it's like, well, we're not really designed for the world that we're working in. So we have to kind of acknowledge that and change some things to try and fit more with what our brain was designed to do. Okay, so I'm just going to share with you an image of the brain. As you can see, if Roger had done this, it would look much different, much more different. That's my mum's husband, the CTO. But anyway, so we've got, so I just want to share this. You don't need to remember it. It's just kind of to give you some context in terms of what I'm going to talk about next. So the areas of the brain, we've got on the top right here, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. And this is part of the brain's pain network. And what happens in this part of the brain is when we detect a conflict, activity in this region increases and it drives us to adjust whatever's causing the conflict. We've got the occipitofrontal cortex, which acts as an error detector. And this plays a role in reporting to us whether our current situation is worrying or dangerous, and then helps to guide our decisions based on that. We've got the amygdala that deals with emotions, especially fear. Then we've got the insula that deals with social emotions, such as pride and guilt. And then just down here, we've got the striatal system, and this is part of the reward network. Okay, so in terms of why our brains don't like change, so those are some, and why you should care. So this is basically why you should care. So the guy called John Cotter did some research, and he found that I think it was 70% of, no, maybe it was 90% of, sorry, I'm bad with statistics sometimes, had a bit of a stressful morning with a 2-year-old not being allowed to go to nursery, so excuse me. But basically, so 70%, that's it. 70% of change efforts fail. And the reason why, the main reason, was because leaders fail to engage their employees. And bearing in mind, this research was done in 1995. Change was nowhere near as just constant, and change in COVID has just been like so much more rapid than even what was happening before. And so this was for planned change. So if you think if people are going out of their way to plan change, then that's been given a lot more thought than what's happening to us all now. So yeah, so the main reason was that people failed to engage their employees. And what happens during the times of change is we start seeing threats everywhere. And these threats bring about physiological changes. So they bring about the fight or flight response. And so what happens then is we have increased activity in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. So that's the brain's alarm, the part of the brain pain network. Then we, oh, sorry, I've lost my place. Sorry, I'm having technical problems. But basically, so yes, so you have these physiological changes, and during the times where the physiological changes occur, we can't act in the same way that we would normally act. So I mentioned before that during times of when you're in the threat response, only essential functions take place. So we can't be as creative as we normally would. We can't think outside the box. We don't see situations in the same way. One of the things that happens is during times of change, we can't predict. So I mentioned that the brain is a prediction machine. During times of change, everything's new. You cannot predict what's going to happen. You don't know what's in your surroundings. You're not used to what's happening. So you then more likely to go into that threat response. During times of change, we start to see our colleagues as a threat. They're not part of my tribe. So you might have worked in organisations before or with teams where during everyday normal life, they're great, they're sharing best practice, they're helping each other out with things, and then some sort of change happens, and then people start to be like, well, I'm not going to help them because I need to focus on my own work, and then maybe there's going to be redundancy, so I don't want to tell them something that then might mean I lose my job. So people start just being much more self-focused rather than working as a team. So this is the real key thing to remember here, is that threat state is a survival state. And so all non-essential functions are turned off. So it's impossible to be fully engaged when you're in this threat state. And during times of change, that's when we really need people to be able to be engaged. Okay, so what can we do? So you probably thinking of, oh no, like this is all terrible. We're fighting biology. That's been going on for thousands of years. She's told us it's not going anywhere. But there are things that we can do. So I'm going to share some of those ideas with you now. So then, in terms of the social brain, what we need to do is to focus on people, not strategy. So during times of change, this is the time when often you don't see any management or any leadership anywhere. They're all behind closed doors, making plans, coming up with change strategies, and what they need to do to put into place. But what they really need to do is to be connecting with people. This isn't a nice to do. It actually has an impact on how we think. So connecting with other people is really rewarding, i.e. it helps to put the brain into a reward state. And although it takes time and effort, in terms of return on investment, it's just the best thing that people can be doing during these times of of change. It's really important to demonstrate fairness and equality. So when things are changing, our brains are more likely to go into the threat state, as I may have mentioned, and we then become more alert to potential unfairnesses. So it could be something really simple, like who gets training on a new system first. But if people think they're being left behind, then they'll feel rejected, and rejection hurts. Social rejection hurts, and it hurts physically. So we kind of tend to think of social pain as being different to physical pain, but the same parts of your brain are activated when we experience physical pain. So researchers at UCLA, and I've got a very a scientific diagram to demonstrate this this experiment that was conducted. So researchers at UCLA conducted an experiment where they asked participants to lie in an fMRI scanner, so a brain imaging machine, and play a game called Cyberball. And so participants were asked to rate how hurt they felt by exclusion. And so what happened in this experiment was, at first, so this person in the red here is the participant, and these are the three blue people, the scientists who were running the experiment. And so, but the participant didn't know that the other person on their team, well, they didn't know, they thought everyone in it was just part of the experiment. So they're playing this game, and then at first the ball, the yellow ball, just gets passed back and forwards. But then after a while, the scientists just start passing it between themselves. And so after the game, participants were asked to rate how hurt they felt by the exclusion. And the higher the score they gave, the more the pain network was activated. So if you think that people are so sensitive that they can feel physical pain after being rejected, but in a game, in an experiment, imagine the damage that could be done if they think they're being left out at work. And then the final piece of advice is just to use the word together. And so researchers at Stanford found that saying the word together can activate the reward response. And so they did an experiment where people were working in teams. So there was two different groups, and they started off all just one group working in one room and one group working in another room. And then partway through the task, they split off in each of the groups split off into different rooms. And so they said to one group, oh, we're now going to go and continue working on the task in separate rooms. And they said to this other group, we're now going to continue working on this task together, but we're going to be in different rooms. And they found that where the word together was used, that group persisted 48% longer than the other group, and they solved the problems more effectively. So that's a really quick win there. At this point, does anybody have any questions? No? Okay, so then what can we do in terms of our brains as prediction machines? So communicate. Obviously, we all know the importance of communication, but if you think our brain can't predict what's going to be going on, and our brain wants to be able to predict what's going on, so it craves information. If we don't have enough information to predict, our brains will start to fill the gaps, because our brains find not having all the information very uncomfortable, and this activates the threat response. And then when you're in the threat response, when it starts filling in these gaps, it's going to start filling it with negative thoughts. Whereas we find being given information very rewarding to our brains, and it activates the reward response. And so if you think it's amazing, people actually prefer bad news to no information. If we think back to the banking study I mentioned earlier, knowing you were going to lose your job kept you being more engaged than not knowing. And often what you can find in times of, just in general, actually, if people don't have all the answers, they don't want to tell people things. Or if they think, oh no, like there's this really bad thing that's going to happen, let's just keep it to ourselves for now. But people always know like they have a sense of when something's not right. And so then people will start imagining things. If you don't know all the answers, just say, okay, we don't have all the answers now. This is what we do know. This is what we're trying to find out, and we'll give you another update on Friday at 10 a.m. If Friday at 10 a.m. comes and you still don't know, that's totally fine. You just then say, okay, I know we said we'd try and find out more information. We still don't know anything else. We'll give you an update on Monday at 10 a.m. So that's then giving that person's brain can then relax, knowing, okay, so this is when I'm going to get the information to fulfill this need to be able to predict. So some managers see communication as a time-consuming task in addition to like the real job. And if you think of like what's been going on, like especially through COVID, when there's been so many new things to do, kind of people can just be left to get on with it, but then they don't know what's going on. Then they go into the threat response. So if you don't communicate, your employees will be distracted and anxious, and just way more time will get wasted. Another thing you need to do is to avoid cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is just a fancy term for having two conflicting thoughts, beliefs, or opinions in your mind at one time. So when going through change, we have to be able to assimilate in our minds, okay, I used to do this thing and that worked really well, and now I'm going to do this thing that's very different, but I'm sure that'll work well as well. And so that can be a bit difficult. So as somebody who is helping people through the change, you need to help them to see how the new way of doing things, how they can use information from how they used to do things to do things in a different way. So for example, if you've got an employee who is they work in sales and they're like, oh, I'm really great at my job because I know everyone who works in this shop, and I go in and I know everyone's kids, and I know when their birthdays are, and I always remember what they did the week before. For them, that's in their mind, that's one of their real strengths. You need to help them to see how, okay, so yeah, that was great in the fact you knew everyone, but you can use that rapport building and those relationships you've got to have those great conversations on Zoom, to send people birthday cards. You can still use those skills in this new way. And then finally, is the person, whoever's responsible, whoever's leading the people, need to be able to manage the situation, but also coach their employees. So I'm a coach, so I always think that coaching is the answer to all of life's problems, and I stand by that. But coaching is really effective, especially during times of change. So during times of change, listening to your employees and asking the right questions will help them to come up with their own solutions. Research shows that people coming up with their solutions activate those reward areas of the brain. Whereas when people get told to do something, it can activate those more negative areas of the brain. So coaching, helping people to come up with their own insight is going to make them be more engaged, but it also will help them to buy into the new process and feel listened to. It's a skill. There might be a few different coaches on here. It's a skill that I think everyone should have. And if I had a different life, I would wear a sandwich board on high streets and just talk about coaching all day. But there's no, like, in terms of just having basic coaching skills, I personally think it's really important for all managers. And there's lots of different books and courses where people can learn these skills. But the main thing just to remember is often during times of change, people worry and feel like they've got no control, but getting them to focus on what they can control through coaching is really great. And so I've got an activity that we won't have time to do, but I'll talk you through how it works. And this is a really great coaching tool that you can use during times of change to help people focus more on what they can actually control rather than what they can't. Okay, so how it works is you've got something that you're concerned about. The first question to ask yourself is this something I need to be concerned about? If the answer is yeah, it's something that you need to be concerned about, you then move into the next circle. Is this something I can influence? If the answer is yes, you then say, is this something I can control? If the answer is yes, you focus then on what you can do to control that situation. If the answer is no, I can't control this, you move back then to influence, and you focus on what you can do to influence that. So I've got some examples of things that people might be worried about. So the worries might be, I'm so stressed, I have a terrible work-life balance since I started working from home. Is this something that people should be concerned about? I would argue yes. Is it something they can influence? I would say absolutely, definitely. And so then, is it something people control? Probably not. There are other factors, like nurseries, not letting your children in when they've got a cold. In that situation, you would look at what can I influence in that situation, rather than just thinking about how stressed you are. The next one, I'm nowhere near as good as my colleagues are with technology. Now that everything's going online, how can I compete? Is it something you should be concerned about? Yeah. Is it something you can influence? Absolutely. You can learn from people, you can learn things, you can go on courses. Is it something you can control? No. You can't control how good everyone else is. You can only influence yourself. Finally, don't know what's going to happen over the next 5 years with COVID. Is it something you should be concerned about? For some people, yeah. For some people, they might not be that bothered. They might just be like, I'm just going to see what happens. Is it something you can influence? You can influence your own life. You can't really influence a global pandemic, sadly. It's definitely not something you can control. When it's a situation where it's not something you even have an influence about, what I suggest to people is, okay, so what I want you to do and what I would suggest that you do is you put that in a box in your head, and when do you want to come back to that? So you're going to not worry about it for a week, or you're not going to worry about it for 2 weeks, and then you can worry about it again, and then we can do this activity again. That's an activity that can be really helpful. Okay, and so this is, as I've said, the main thing. So our brains are not designed for the 21st century workplace. Not much has actually changed in our brains since we were all running around in these lovely leopard print outfits. And so we need to just bear that in mind when we're working with people and work with their kind of hardware rather than against it. And also you might be wondering, why did I get you to write down something that you feel proud of within the last 12 months? And that was to put your brain into the reward state. And so you would feel motivated to listen to me and to concentrate and to think that this was a really great presentation. And so that is the end of the information sharing part of the presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Becca, love that. Thanks a million. And especially with your 2-year-old not being allowed into nursery. I know that, but I love the metaphor, Becca, of your brain's being a prediction machine, and then obviously making the link to coaching, being able to use those prediction machines better. I love that. And even thank you for that link, because actually I have a workshop tomorrow. I liked what you said. I wasn't sure where you were going with how would you lose weight. And then obviously you base it on science. Lovely, because actually it fits in something I have to do tomorrow. But it's gonna, if you had to recommend one book in this space, what would it be?
So there's a book called, it's called The Neuroscience of Change, and it's by a woman called Hillary something. I'll send you it on LinkedIn.
Great.
It's brilliant. It's really, really good.
Great. It was linked. Did you ever do Richard Davison, The Emotional Life of Your Brain? Have you come across him?
Oh no, is it good?
Yeah.
I love anything.
And it's linking more in with the emotions as well. But I was going to ask you how you'd rate it. No, I really liked it. Yeah.
Okay, great. There's another. Have you? There's a few other books about stuff similar, not about change, but David Rock.
Yeah.
His stuff's really good.
Very good. Yeah. No, because I love the way you presented it, because. And you're backing it up with all your studies, because there is a lot of neurofeticists out there, who kind of make up these things about the brain and kind of exaggerate it. And I'm always anxious about them, because it's not reality. So thanks for basing it on science. It's really great.
I do like that. As a psychologist, I do like to base things on science. I think
yeah, absolutely. But you hear a lot of coaches with a flip chart and off they go, and they're making these links. You go, really?
Yeah, well, thanks for taking a risk there, Alan. Just like, a bit scared of these neuroscience people, but.
Well, no, I knew yours would be okay because you're a chartered psychologist. So, you know, I think we need more of that.
Well, me too.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's the way you present it as well, Becca. Like, thanks so much for you. Such an authentic, deprecating style, and you've made quite practical sense of something that can be, as you said, Alan. There's some neuro fetishists, and some people like to overcome.
Yeah, and let's be. And in university, when it comes to this topic, eyes glaze over, and you can't wait for it to be over. So absolutely, Becca, you have a great delivery.
Yeah.
Thank you. I couldn't see my notes. So, you know, when you have like, often I usually have the notes on the side, and I was just like, so what was this bit meant to be about again? I think it's something to do with this. So some of the bits where I just seem to like completely change topic, that's why. So there's more information to share.
I really like the piece about the research from Stanford around the word together. I think that's great. It's so simple and so powerful.
Yeah, I've had some people who've seen this and then they said, like, from then on they just put it together in all their emails. Like, yeah, you go. That's a good little hack.
What did anybody else think? Anything anyone would like to share? Any questions for Becca?
A comment about the social pain. I think that's always so interesting. And David Rock has got images. He's got summaries of his work, and there's images there of the brain and how it lights up the physical pain, and the social pain really lights up the same areas in the brain. So yeah, I think that's fascinating. I haven't heard of that example, that experiment about the rejection with the game with the ball. So just so fascinating at how intense that is. And I think often people unintentionally exclude people as well in the change process, maybe just forget to communicate something, and how then it triggers that stress or threat response. And all the messages that people formulate in their minds just creates a whole different story, which can be just so negative and destructive. So yeah, really interesting to hear that stuff. Thanks, Becca.
You're welcome. Yeah, definitely agree. Like, I think sometimes people are even doing it out of a good place of like, oh, well, they must be so busy because there's all this stuff going on, so we'll just sort it out. But then it can have the opposite impact.
Or as you were talking about, Becca, how we tend to become a little bit more internal and inwardly focused in times of change. So all of these leaders, as you say, Sandra, maybe we think we're doing things right with the good intentions, but perhaps unintentionally, because of that inward focus, are often leaving people out. Yeah.
I have a question, if that's okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was just wondering, that diagram that you showed about the brain and kind of saying that, you know, the brain is wired to not kind of like change or to fear change. What are the factors then in some, it feels like some people are more naturally okay with change. Like, I know there's different tools and techniques that you can do, but it feels like some people are more naturally comfortable with change than others. Is that? So I'm just wondering what's the factors.
It's not something I've looked into, just from the question and then like how, like, logically I would say that why some people are more comfortable with change. I would imagine it's to do with the amount of experience you've had with it. So if you've had, like, just like with anything, the more we do something, the more comfortable we tend to become. Up to a certain point, I think that probably if you've had a very turbulent, change-filled childhood, that might have the opposite effect. I think if you're used to working in these, like, so I first did this presentation for an event called Women of Silicon Valley, which is about startups, and that was the reason why they wanted me to do it, was because of the amount of change that startups go through, and in the tech industry it's just all the time and constant, and so those are people who are probably more comfortable with it. But I would also imagine that it's also partly to do with how flexible you are. So you have some people who are very, very organized and they want to know things very far in advance. And then you have people who are very, very flexible and just happy to go with the flow. There would be a relationship there, I would imagine, between how you can balance those two things. So if you are too much focused on, like, being organized and everything needs to go exactly the right way, otherwise you get stressed out, then you're probably going to find change quite difficult. Likewise, if you're too flexible, although you'll be comfortable with the change, if you don't have that organisational side, there's going to be kind of you're just going to be a bit scattered. And I think having that balance between being quite organised, but also quite comfortable with being flexible and going with the flow, I would imagine that impacts how comfortable people feel with change, but also how they come across to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so how
Okay, yeah, no, it's really interesting.
Change.
No, that makes perfect sense.
And also, Jill, I always had a talk. Do you know Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology? He originally did the research around learned helplessness in the 70s. So why do some kids fall behind? They get unconscious cues from the teachers or their parents. They don't believe they can. So a bit like Becca was describing there. So change for them obviously would be something they wouldn't step into. And it was interesting. We described it as learned, as in we had somebody to blame for it. But on a recent session he actually did for Royal College of Surgeons, in his latter years now, he's discovered it isn't actually learned. It's a default. We all default to be afraid of it. So, but then some of us learn how to get out of it, but we have to be intentional about it. And even what Becca showed us today is a way to become intentional about it, because even being exposed to the fact things can change. You know, there was a paper in the Harvard Business Review saying that most bias training doesn't work, but when it does work, it's when they actually explore the maladaptive nature of your brain, and you can show people you can rewire, you can change. That is an impetus for people to do it, you know. So it's so you can nearly, no matter what training you're doing, if you kind of cover what Becca's done there, the idea would be they're more likely to engage in it.
Yeah, no, very interesting. Thanks a million.
And the brain as well. I mean, that diagram that Becca showed us, like any other part of the human body, there'll be slight variances in it. You know, we could show you a picture of a skeleton, but then you'd have some people with longer bones or shorter bones or denser bones, and the same applies there. Yeah.
Can I ask a question, Becca?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how would you apply this to almost the life cycle of change? You know, the way there's an initial thing where you kind of, the change is happening and you find out about it and you have to come to terms with it. And a lot of what you've talked about about threat and reward seem to fit at that point. But then, you know, all the bridges stuff, you know, then there's the explorations and then new beginnings and people climb their way out of it. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering, maybe for the later stages of the life cycle of changes, how would you apply this thinking about the brain and its response?
So for me, my opinion is that it's relevant at all stages. So the way we'll think of this is a new change. Things are always changing. So even if when people are getting used to things, people can still have anxieties. So you can have a thing where it's like some people have got much more used to something more quickly, and then the other people are feeling like in the threat response of this new system that's been in place for 6 months and I still don't know how to use this one part of the system. But I can't ask now because it's been too long. So I think just having this obviously as a coach I'm biased, but the coaching part of it I think is just constant and should be a constant part of businesses in general. I'm really pro coaching culture in organizations. So I just think having this awareness always of things that can make people go into the threat response at all stages is really, really important. Because what's changed to one person might not be a big deal to someone else. So I have a long-standing back injury, and my car parking space where I used to work at the NHS got moved to somewhere where I had to walk for 15 minutes, and it was really, really bad. And for me, that was a big change. For somebody else, them having to walk 15 minutes from their car parking, that's not a big deal, but that impacted then how I felt when I got to work, and the stress of at the end of the day I've got to walk back to my car. So it's a strange example, but you don't know what one person's going to think of as a change versus another person. So just by having this thing of making people be able to predict, by encouraging people to be social, by making sure you're not ever leaving people out, by asking somebody, right, okay, we need to move someone's car parking space, who's it not a big deal for? those kinds of things I think are just relevant through the whole change cycle. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, thanks. And so it just underlines, each person is a focus group of one, just treat each person as an individual and just think about them as an individual. Yeah, everybody's different.
Yeah. Exactly. So I've got another, because I always like to just shove a little bit of neuropsychology into everything I do. So I've got another talk on why coaching is so effective for your brain. And there's a thing in that about how from the moment we're born, we are making different, we're forming different connections. Somebody could have been born, I've got a 2-year-old daughter. There might have been a person who had a baby the same day at the same time in the ward next to me who ended up living on the same street as me. But by now our 2 children have had so many different experiences, yet in organisations we tend to treat people the same. And so I think that's a really key thing that I just try to make people see of 2 people, siblings, they end up to be so different. And so treating people just as individuals who will be having a different experience every minute of the day is really, really key. Anyone else?
We can start to wrap up if there's nothing else, but a couple of us will still be around for a few minutes after we officially finish. If anybody would like to stay on to talk a little bit longer then. Becca, anything more from you?
No, just thank you everybody for coming. And I always like these types of things because sometimes when I do this, it's because people are being forced to come. So it's nice to do it for people who are genuinely interested in the topic and have chosen to take time out of their busy lives to come and learn about this kind of stuff. So just thanks everyone for coming. Oh, actually, no, I do have other things to do. It would be great to connect with everyone. I always like to see what people are sharing on LinkedIn. If anyone's got any questions, just get in touch with me. Book recommendations, I always appreciate. So my name is Becca Brighty and I'm the only person on LinkedIn called that, which makes it easy. I don't know what people's backgrounds are, but I offer a free, you're not meant to say, a complimentary threat response risk diagnostic call. And that's just where we go through a process where we look at the organisation and we see where there might be some quick wins to reduce that threat response within your organisation. And then if anyone on here is based in the northeast of England, I run a networking event every month where we do things like this, but it's workshops. So it's a 2-hour event. There's coffee and cakes and chatting at the beginning. Then we do a workshop. It's all designed to encourage people to work together. So you've got a really natural reason to talk to people. The next session is on developing a coaching leadership style. And that's on the 8th of December. So if anyone here is in the northeast of England, it is really good. You should travel, honestly. Although actually, I think it's on the same time as this. So no, actually, yours starts at 11 and mine finishes at 11. So you can just then get onto the internet, get onto the Dirty Salad Club. But yeah, it would just be great to see people there. That is definitely the end.
Thanks, Becca. That was great.
You're welcome.
And that leads us nicely into our next Dirty Salad Club session is on the 8th of December. So we're going for early in the month of December because I know people's diaries fill up as we get towards the end of the month and silly season. So for our final session for 2021, we have all of us, the whole team of Kinch Lions are going to be hosting together. So we're going to have a very festive session. We're going to have a bit of crack and we're going to be looking back over our favorite sessions from 2021, our highlights, some bloopers. So speaking of being vulnerable, we're hoping people will come and share some of their little secrets about things that went on in sessions throughout the year. So I'd love to see you all there. And lots more people as well. So be having a think maybe about your favorite sessions from the year, what you particularly enjoyed, what you found really helpful. And we'll all be talking about that together on the 8th of December. That'll be up on Eventbrite and we'll send out details before tomorrow as well. So Thanks so much, everybody, for your time today, and we hope to see you again on the 8th of December. And thank you so much to Becca Brighty. It was a really, really great session, Becca, and thanks so much for sharing your time and wisdom with all of us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, that's it from us, folks. Keep in touch. We'll be on LinkedIn, we'll be on the emails, and we hope to see you all again soon. Bye for now.
Thanks a million. Bye.
Thanks very much. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.